Well, thank you. Good morning. How is everybody? We awake? Looks like this is almost like church. You can tell it's church because there's nobody in the front pew. But just let me get a sense of, kind of what the audience looks like just for this panel. So how many in the audience are, in this case, government? Just kind of give me a raise of hands. Okay. And how many are, if you will, contractors? Okay. It's a pretty good split, about 50-50. Okay, well, listen, I do appreciate the opportunity to come down here. As John said, we do have a distinguished panel, and I'm not going to, if you will, read what they've done, but I am going to read what they do, because I think it's important that we understand here what we're trying to do, and quite frankly, the way this panel is organized, its requirements, its acquisition, and it's also industry. And so you have that mix of all the key partners that are responsible for delivering capability to the warfighters, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines. So to my right is Rear Admiral Terry Kraft. He is currently the commander of the Naval Warfare Development Command and responsible for linking tomorrow's ideas to today's warfighters through the rapid generation and development of innovative solutions to operational challenges. The NWDC is focused on non-material solutions for the near term and future in order to stay at the forefront of innovation. And they seamlessly combine their core competencies in concepts experimentation, modeling and simulation, doctrine and lessons learned to generate cost-effective solutions for the warfighter to meet the global challenges of the current and future maritime environment. To his right, at one point in time, was a neighbor of mine there at Fort Sill. We were lieutenants. He was a senior lieutenant. I think almost a captain. He may have been a captain, I don't recall, but would certainly chastise me for not cutting my grass on time. But anyway, Al Resnick, and we've kind of spent a lot of time together, is currently the Director of Analysis and Integration Directorate at TRADOC, where he's responsible for plans, policies, procedures, and programs for capability developments and requirements-related functions, maintaining the relevancy and directing execution across the entire command. He provides senior-level representation to Headquarters, Department of Army, external agencies, and industry, and maintains regular dialogue with TRADOC Centers of Excellence for capability developers to ensure the needs are fully represented. To his right is Mr. Jim Smirchansky, who currently serves as the Deputy Commander, System Engineering, Interoperability, Architecture, and Technology for the Marine Corps Systems Command. As the Deputy Commander, Mr. Smirchansky, sorry, Jim, I'll just call it Jim. We'll go from Jim from now on, is responsible for leading Marine Air Ground Task Force system engineering integration efforts, ensuring Marine Corps systems operability with coalition and joint warfighters, and identifying and pursuing science and technology transition opportunities from the Marine Corps systems. He also serves as the System Engineering Competency Director, the Technical Authority Deputy Warranting Officer, and the lead for Marine Corps Engineering Community of Interest. And finally, to the far right is Mr. Ken Mahler, who is currently the Vice President of Navy Programs at Newport Shipbuilding, a division of Huntington Ingalls Industry, located at Newport News, Virginia. He's been in this position since 2008 and is responsible for aircraft carrier construction, aircraft carrier refueling and overhaul programs, aircraft carrier inactivation programs, and Virginia submarine construction, as well as other fleets for the Navy. And the only thing I'll sort of mention that's peculiar about Ken, and I call this out because I think I have an affiliation with Fred Rainbow. I don't know if he's in this particular audience. But Ken is kind of a success story of the intern program. He started there as an intern back in 1985 and currently is now a vice president. So all you, I don't know, we have any interns in the audience? Do we have any junior interns? I guess not. But in many cases, this is one of those things that, just like AFCEA, intern programs are important. So let me kind of give you a sense of what we're going to talk about here. As a member of the now corporate industry, as John mentioned, I am a partner with A.T. Kearney. My sense of it is, and a lot of review that we've done, and specific on Navy, Air Force, and Army programs, is that clearly improvements have to be made in order to cut costs, increase flexibility, and reduce delivery delays. And you no longer have to look too much farther in terms of programs that were complex and in many cases wasted money, other than the Jitters program, where in many cases, if you look back, there was a disjointed approval process, unproven technologies, ever-changing requirements, and very complex regulatory burdens. And when you juxtapose that to the commercial, which in many cases is what we do in terms of the firm, because the firm, quite frankly, is a commercial firm advising, if you will, the energy industry, the automotive industry, finance, healthcare, and so forth, that what's different is, in many cases, they bring all the parties together at the table. And if you compare, in some cases, the major aircraft programs of some of the commercial industry versus the aircraft programs that we've had here in the Air Force and the Navy, their typical reduction in terms of time for scheduling is 30 months less, and they deliver in 50 months less. And that's compared to, in many cases, some of the programs we talked about. So if we look at it from our particular vantage point, there are 4 obstacles that have to be overcome. First is use of immature and in many cases high-risk technology. In many cases, a lot of these requirements are untradeable, and in many cases create more risk than typically what you see in the commercial industry. The second one is changing requirements. There are frequent changes to requirements over time. We did a little bit of analysis on this and found out where programs, in many cases, 84% had changes in requirements. The resulting, if you will, increase in cost was about 40%. You compare that to programs, in many cases, that didn't change requirements, which was a very small minority, about 18%, and their cost increase was only 8%. So there's a lot of statistical data that basically says you need to make sure that you don't continue to change requirements. The third one is regulatory burdens. And I think anybody that's been in the acquisition process, whether it's requirements or the acquisition professionals, can kind of attest to the fact that in many cases this creates, if you will, increases in cost anywhere in the R&D from about 3 to 30%, and production anywhere from about 7 to 60%. And finally, there's the multiple disjointed decision support systems. And this goes along the lines of requirements, acquisition, and budgeting, which in many cases those functional elements are focused on making sure that A, budgets are done and costs are down, requirements are high and make sure everything is there, and acquisitions trying to deliver things on time, and quite frankly, decisions are made within each one of those particular stovepipes, independent of the impact it has on the other, if you will, partners. In fact, when we did an analysis here at DoD of the typical types of steps in order to take a program from evolution to development into fielding and so forth, it was about 228 steps. You compare that to the commercial sector, it's about 56. So in the end, you know, you talk about best business practices, I would draw the experience of the Boeing 777, where they were looking at aluminum to lithium, which in many cases was going to help improve the strength, but also in many cases was going to provide weight savings for that aircraft. At the end of the day, while it was a great technology, it was in many cases unproven. It was expensive, the manufacturing processes were not stable, and in many cases they also had, limited availability. So quite frankly, the decision was made not to do that. And the result was they were able to deliver that particular, if you will, aircraft pretty much on time. You juxtapose that with DoD, where I would say in many cases the focus is on documentation and capabilities. And, again, one more comparison in terms of commercial. Time is cost. Time is cost. So at the end, what I would say are 3 things that have to be done. 1, establish technology thresholds. In other words, that means more spiral development in order to get capability out to the field. And I know we only have one military person here, one military active duty person here, but my experience in terms of acquisition is soldiers, and I would say the same thing with Marines and Navy and Airmen, they're more creative in trying to figure out what to do with that capability. Just give it to them, and they'll figure out what to do with it. Don't try to give them nirvana, because quite frankly, by the time it gets there, it's not needed. The second thing would be freeze requirements at the decision points. Quit mucking with the requirements throughout the process. It doesn't have to be perfect when it comes out, just get something there and continue to evolve it. And lastly, establish milestones and rewards. And I think the department needs to start thinking about how do we do and what do we do to reward people to compress time in delivering capability to the warfighter. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Admiral Kraft. So you're going to find with Admiral Kraft, as well as with Al Resnick, a little bit of discussion on requirements. We'll get to Jim. He'll talk a little bit about acquisition. And at the end of the day, we'll have Ken speak to, what does this mean for the guy at the end of the pipeline that's got to deliver the capability to the warfighter. So, Terry?
Thanks, General. I want to thank FC and USNI for inviting me. I got to do this in San Diego a few months ago. I promise it's not a rehash of what I did there, but it was actually an excellent interaction. We got a lot of good leads at NWDC from what we did there. My sister flies a 777, so I'm glad that worked out okay. A couple things I'm going to talk about today. I think the reason that the General wanted me to go first is, we work hard at the intake end of requirements. Now, I've been a requirements officer when I worked in the Pentagon, so I know how that goes. I know about protecting programs of record. I know about changing requirements. So it's very important to get things right at the very beginning. So two areas that we spend a lot of our time at working at NWDC is the area of concepts and experimentation. So for concepts, first I want to lead off with a quote. Great book I just finished by Peter Diamandis called Abundance. Anybody read the book Abundance? Thought it was excellent. The future is better than you think. He said the best way to predict the future is to create it yourself, right? So creating the future means getting it right at the very beginning, and that means being able to decide what's the right stuff that we need. Well, that really comes from concepts, if you will. To know, as General mentioned, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you need to have an operational input there to decide where do we really need to go. If you rush the wrong stuff to the warfighter, and sometimes even the right stuff to the warfighter, it's going to fail if it's not supported, integrated with other systems, and employed by trained operators. During my time in the Pentagon, then CNO Ruffhead expressed continual frustration with rolling out something that suddenly didn't talk to something else, or that was a one-off, or that just didn't work. There's one particular program, and I remember he stood up and said, I don't even want to know how much money we've already spent in this program. And to me, that meant that we failed in doing things right. So getting the right stuff means you start off with the right concept. And this is where we live at NWDC. You have to describe the anticipated capabilities across the entire .mil-PF system. You have to show how that's going to integrate. And, the new term that you hear a lot about is wholeness, looking at, okay, what's the entire cost to own and operate this system? And finally, you must have a strong concept on what you want to do with it. One thing I'll point out right now, we're rolling out right now the Joint High-Speed Vessel, right, which comes under Military Sealift Command. But if you understand the JHSV and all the things you can do with this very fast, very reconfigurable, empty box, the possibilities are endless. So when you think about concepts for the JHSV, you've rolled this out. What are the kind of payloads we can put on this platform to do any number of things? And there's an unlimited number of tactical things you can do with the JHSV. That's an example of getting, of having the ideas right on what you can do with this thing. Concepts have to fit with your strategy. The real important concepts need to be game-changing. We spend a lot of time on innovation at NWDC. And the best ideas we get are the intersectional ideas. So when we come to a forum like this and I get people that come from all different areas that come up to me and say, hey, this is something I think you could do with that concept, or here's a direction that you can go. That's where you're going to get the intersectional ideas. And instead of just being on just a constant improvement vector, suddenly you get on a kind of a vertical game-changing vector. A good concept is going to win the value proposition. You hear a lot of this now as well. When you get into high-end warfare, if you're shooting down one of his things that's very inexpensive for them to build with something that's very expensive for us to build, we're not winning the value proposition, and we're eventually going to lose that fight. So CNO said, hey, I want you to stand up a more innovative way to look at a lot of concepts that are out there right now. We get a ton of great ideas from industry. There's a lot of innovation that's going on with industry right now. So the question is, what does that mean for the Navy? So two groups we stood up. One of them was over at the innovation place Yesterday, Lieutenant Ben Coleman is here as a leader of that group, was the CNO's Rapid Innovation Cell. He said, I want you to build a group of free radicals, he calls them, that can look at innovative ideas that are out there and decide, hey, what's important for the Navy? What do we want to experiment with? So the charter for this group is to take things that are near prototype ready and push them out to the fleet and try them out. They talked yesterday about things they're doing with laser communications, suspended undersea fiber, and basically these 12 lieutenants, 10 lieutenants and 2 lieutenant commanders are free to investigate the things that they think are important, and I can tell you they have an entirely different worldview than I have, and they're not shy about sharing it. I mentioned laser comms, suspended undersea fiber, 3D printing, some cyber stuff that they're off on, even picking up some Google Glasses and putting them out on ships. The general talked about, hey, sometimes we need to pluck stuff out and give it to an operator and see what he can do with it. That's what the CNO Rapid Innovation Cell is on about right now. But the key in building this innovation process, is, if you will, is every time we've tried to do this before, we've built a process for innovation, for developing new concepts, we tend to squash the very thing that we're looking for with bureaucracy. So the idea is to build a channel. The other part of this group, and the CNO just signed off the charter last month, is the CNO Advisory Board. Now, he's got a lot of different boards. This one's different. It's a mix of senior 3-stars. I helped man it up as a secretary, and we combined some academic folks and some industry folks for a 9-person group, and their job is kind of a larger version of the CRIC, if you will, is to look at the big trends and the big things that are out there and help the CNO decide and understand which ones are important. So that's the process for innovation that we've built. Can you innovate within a bureaucracy? Can you drive concepts within a bureaucracy? That's the hard part. And really, that's the intake part that we're working on. Concepts in early stages of generation, I'll just throw out a few. Distributed air wing concept. You saw the UCAS launch off Bush last week. You're going to see it land on Bush, I think, in July. So, introducing unmanned aircraft into the carrier air wing and into the carrier strike group, if you will, or onto every individual ship. That's the idea behind the distributed air wing concept, which is definitely, I think, an area that we need to continue to look at. Influencing economics from sea, surgical sea power. We're not, when you look at the principles of war, we're not going to have the mass anymore. So really, I think the challenge is, how do you replace mass with agility, especially over long distances? That's going to be a networking problem. That's going to be a command and control problem, if you will. Those are some things that the CAB is looking at right now. So shift gears, I'm going to talk a little bit about experimentation. If you don't have a valid program for experimentation and wargaming and testing out all these new ideas, then you're going to go into the requirements generation phase. You're going to go into the acquisition phase with something that is not very well thought out or tested out, if you will. So the value of experimentation is huge. CNO has driven this point home with me several times, really revamping the work that's going on at the Naval War College with war games. And what's happened for me, I work under Fleet Forces, is they have pushed experimentation, a lead for experimentation, back to NWDC, which I think is the right place for it to live. I've got 1 minute. That's okay. So how are we doing the right things for experimentation in MWDC? So we send out a fleet call. We've had about 100 different projects that we've sorted through, 100 different proposed initiatives to build our experimentation program. One example of a success of experimentation is the laser weapon system, or LAWS, which we're getting ready to put on our float forward staging base, the Ponce in the Gulf. That was tested out in Trident Warrior 2011 and Black Dart 2012, both parts of experimentation under the Fleet Experimentation Program, or FLEX. The other we've brought back is TAC D&E. Anybody remember from the Navy side TAC D&E? Used to be, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was flying, that when you deployed, you'd get a tactical development and execution project for your team, and you'd go out and you'd try it. Well, that money kind of went away, and that emphasis kind of went away. We've brought back TAC D&E over the past year. We pushed 5 projects out that the fleet has said, hey, we need someone to help us do that. we have 8 more TAC-D&E projects for fiscal year 13. Experimentation and wargaming pushed out to the fleet to help the operators decide what they need. I think we've got to be a learning organization. I'll leave you with one quote from Arie de Geus, who is the CEO of Royal Dutch Shell. He said, "The ability to learn faster than the competition is really the only sustainable competitive advantage that we're going to have as we move forward. If we're not a learning organization, then we're really not going to get to where we need to go." So that's my talk, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Terry. Al?
Thank you very much, General Sorensen. Before I start, General Dubia, on behalf of all of us in Training and Doctrine Command, thank you very much for the opportunity for us in TRADOC to be here today. What I'd like to do, ladies and gentlemen, is cover several topics just briefly in the hope of whetting your appetite for some questions later on. And I'll start with something that really goes to the basic theme of this panel, rapid equipping the force. About 12 years ago, soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen were all deployed. They were deployed in either Iraq or in Afghanistan. And as a result of that, the Army established 2 programs, the AWG, Advanced Warfighting Group, and the Rapid Equipping the Force. That was needed because we had to have solutions quickly. Soldiers were in contact. Soldiers needed something to help them. And it ran the gamut of all of the .mil PF. Well, now as OIF is over, Iraq is over, and as OEF is waning, the elimination of the overseas contingency funding and all of the severe budget constraints are coming upon us. The Army is transitioning from an army of execution, kind of the old just do it, to an army of preparation. The preparation is the question. For what? There are any number of situations that the Army has to be prepared for. And we are aligning ourselves with various regions around the world. We're trying to provide combatant commanders needed support. And one of the things that we don't want to forget from this last 12 years is the need to be able to adapt rapidly, is the need to have either a doctrine or materiel solution ready to go, able to go in a short order to soldiers as they go into an operation. Well, why is that? Well, quite simply, our adversary goes to school on us. Everywhere, and I'm not stuttering. The mass media, they use to their advantage. So what we may have been doing successfully in one time will no longer be successful. So the operational environment is constantly changing. The second part of that is, with due apologies to a folk singer of my era, Bob Dylan, the times they are constantly changing. The technology is changing just like that. I carry around a tablet 2 years ago that didn't exist. And 2 years from now, well, probably less than a year from now, it'll be a nice doorstop. So we have this Rapid Equipping the Force initiative and the Advanced Warfighting Group that are really aimed at doing just that. And we are trying to maintain the best of breed as we come back in out of the different overseas contingencies. As we go to that, we've also come up with something called the Agile process. Some of you may have heard of that as the network integration evaluation that's conducted twice a year down at Fort Bliss. The NIE, or the Agile process, is also another way to turn technology, to put technology solutions, whether it's hardware or software, in the hands of soldiers and say, does it do what you need it to do? Again, we're not trying to make requirements at the specification level, but what is it that you need the piece of kit to be able to do? And we do that twice a year. We have a brigade combat team out of the 1st Armored Division that twice a year goes through one of the most expansive training areas in the United States, White Sands Missile Range, and they run through their tactical paces and use various items as we try and provide feedback to you in industry, to government, and to ourselves to say, is that good enough? We start with a whole deliberate way that takes a span of, oh, wait a second. as General Dubia knows, when the gun line gets loud, you start screaming, and I don't want to. That's right, exactly. We have a 6-month deliberate process that we start with. What is the problem? What's the gap? What's the inability that the soldiers need to have resolved? And then we go out and solicit input from industry and government. And then through a series of deliberate steps that run the span, again, through a 6-month process, they show up down at Fort Bliss. We train those affected soldiers in the brigade combat team, and they go out and use it. And we get some superb feedback as to whether that piece of kit serves the intended purpose. And that really leads us to what is it that we need to be able to do with this? And as we do this, we have got to a point General Sorensen made, we have got to be able to have some way to get through all of the wickets with the good enough solution. And that's what we're striving to do with the Agile process. To my last area that I'll address very briefly are requirements initiatives. Over the years, everybody has all of this very deliberate, set piece way to establish requirements. And it starts with the concept, as the Admiral pointed out, and it should. It absolutely must, because there has to be an operational concept behind everything. But then it goes on and goes through a time consuming, and again, I am not stuttering, I'm trying to make the point, and it takes a lot of time, and we have so many decision hurdles. Well, we've tried to come up with a number of ways to streamline to streamline our side of it, the requirements part of it. First of all, people use the word requirements. I once made a presentation on requirement. The title of it was "Requirements is defined as to where you sit." All too often I have seen requirements as specifications. That's not what they're all about. We have made a real deliberate effort to step back and say, what's the operational problem we're trying to resolve? An example, a communications device called Rifleman's Radio. Nowhere in that 15-page document is there anything about a waveform. And I had Mercury, messenger of the gods, almost ready to disown us because we didn't have a waveform. Why should we have a waveform in there? It's all about what it is, and it really was intended to do 3 things. For every soldier in a squad to be able to communicate with his fellow squad members, for that squad leadership to know where the members of the squad were, and last but by no means least, to be able to provide a way for other leaders outside that squad to know where the squad members were. That's it. So how it was set up in the network and the like were really moot. We left it open, and as General Sorensen pointed out, it really rose from the ashes of the Jitters program, and we fielded that, let's see, less than 3 years from the time we approved it in TRADOC, or we validated in TRADOC till the time it was fielded. So again, a requirement is not necessarily a specification. The second part of the initiatives that we're undertaking are trades. What's good enough? If we have that need to communicate amongst members of the squad, how dispersed is the squad? Can one squad member's radio relay for another squad member's radio? Why not? So I don't necessarily need to go from one end of the squad to the other individually, just so long as I can hop across there. We found that to be a very simple way to resolve some of the power problems that our material developer cohorts had. And additionally, we looked at how do we balance affordability? And I started off with the times are becoming much more fiscally constrained. And we have that end state, but what's the first increment? The first increment ought to be something that's affordable, that is also that we can get out in a span of about 3 to 5 years. And we're trying to throttle our appetite. I'm getting the hook. We're trying to throttle our appetite so that we too do these things incrementally. So again, I'm just trying to hit the wave tops, and stimulate some questions from you. So thank you very much.
Al, thank you. Okay, Jim.
All right, great. General Dubia, General Sorensen, I want to thank you for both having us here into the Naval Institute and having this panel. You know, this topic of acquisition not moving fast enough, modifications that are necessary in order to get more capability out tends to be a constant discussion. I think you're going to hear some very common themes. As a matter of fact, when I was listening along the line, starting even with General Sorensen, I'll tell you right now that some of what I'm going to say is going to appear to be brought to you by the Department of Redundancy Department. And it's going to be from a slightly different twist and a slightly different perspective on an acquisition panel, a career acquisition guy. So first step in a 12-step program, right, is admit you got a problem. Well, my name's Jim, and I'm a career acquisition professional. I'm also a career civil servant. So I'm going to take 20 seconds. I'm going to talk to the people who raised their hand when General Sorensen said, who in here is a civil servant? First off, I'm a career civil servant, GS7, starting in 1985. 2 weeks prior to that, I was a cook at a Ponderosa steakhouse while I was still in college. So this is the career that I have known and always in the acquisition corps. Let me tell you, it's tough right now to be a civil servant, isn't it? What I'm going to tell you is that the work that you're doing is absolutely appreciated. The work that we're doing is absolutely appreciated. It is absolutely necessary. And I would just ask you, as tough as it is, don't get caught up in the drama that is created, mostly inside the Beltway, because the work that you're doing is critical and we need to just press through it. But trust me, at all levels, we feel what that pressure is, but I'd ask you to keep it up. My career has varied, although always in acquisition. I've been an engineer, I've been a program manager. I spent 2 years working for Admiral Walt Dorn when he was the commander of the Pacific Fleet as his science and technology advisor, picked my family up, moved to Hawaii for 2 years. So I had kind of an operational flavor of trying to see how science and technology and acquisition could support the warfighter. And then I came back and was working between submarines and surface ships. So I've seen acquisition from a lot of different perspectives. And quite frankly, I think kind of honed my view on it. And the first thing I'm going to say, quite frankly, at times doesn't make me real popular when you have discussions about acquisition, and that is that the process that we have is really not the enemy. Because there are plenty of success stories about how to use the process. It's the awareness of the process that we have to live within, and the embracing of how you can tailor it, and of ways of taking advantage of the fact that it allows streamlining. What it really requires is an understanding of that process. It requires upfront thinking, which we're being called to do more and more, and appropriately, by the way. It's a shame that we actually have to put it in writing to ask us to think, but to really to take a look at trying to get your strategies done very early within the processes and regulations and statutes that we have. Because let me tell you, people have tilted at that windmill, and that's not the enemy. That's not where you're going to get the big bang. It's on early socialization of the approaches that you have. It's laying out and being able to defend and knowing who you have to defend to, the processes that you really want to try and get into place. So I'd ask you not to be intimidated by this process, and quite frankly, if you want to be intimidated by it, you can either get over it or die intimidated, because really I don't think you're going to be able to push yourself, quite frankly, through that. Like I said, there are lots of successes. We do a lot of smaller programs within the Marine Corps. I'm fortunate in my role as the Chief Engineer of the Marine Corps at the Marine Corps Systems Command to be able to help our program managers. The mission statement for my workforce, which is about 600 engineers within the Marine Corps, it's a very short mission statement. It's not the big one that you have to turn the page when you're reading somebody's mission statement. Ours is to help programs be successful through disciplined system engineering. So it means two things. The first is help programs be successful. I tell my workforce they're not the ones who have to push the big red button every time to stop by, hey, you're not following the exact system engineering tech review process. That's not the job. The job is to help them be successful. Conversely, you can't let them do something, I say stupid, and I get reprimanded for that, but I just said it again, didn't I? But we do it through disciplined system engineering, where we're trying to put rigor into it. Because I'll tell you what, there are warehouses littered with GAO reports that when you start to see a program go south, you can start to write the bottom line up front of that GAO report. Lack of understood requirements, requirement stability, lack of system engineering rigor, excessive technical risks. Quite frankly, I was writing down what General Sorensen was saying, and I was writing it down. I was like, hey, these all look familiar. And I looked at my own notes and said, oh yeah, those are the same exact things that I was going to talk about. So you can see a common approach. But then why are most lessons learned not learned? I mean, there's got to be an awareness up front that these are the areas you really have to tackle and try and get under control. Understand the requirements. And oh, by the way, understand the requirements. It's not just understand them, because we can understand them, and I agree with Mr. Resnick on this. There's big R operational requirements, and then there's the ones that we generate. I will tell you that when we get a capability document, description document, and it might have 9 what we call key performance parameters in it. By the time it gets through me into a spec, there are 1,400 shalls. Believe me, every one of those shalls is a requirement in and of itself, and that's where derived requirements can begin to drive cost and delays of a schedule. So there's got to be kind of that recognition. But if any of those big key parameters change, those big R requirements, then that flows all the way through the program. And a lot of times when they change, they're really not understood what the ultimate unintended consequences of them are. So I mean, that's really something that we need to, the requirements and the technical community have to continue to pair on. And the technical community has to be able to create trade space for the requirements community. Like, we understand that that's what you need, or that's what you want. I will tell you that given that, you are going to be faced with the following technical challenges and risks, which quite frankly might be, if the requirements, big R requirements community knew that, there might be some trade space in there that they can back off. And I think it really, that relationship lends itself. Talk about the separation of that church and state between requirements and acquisition. Quite frankly, nobody ever said that we couldn't partner to come up with them. And that's really where I think we need to continue to work. This whole thing, sometimes you got to go slow to go fast. There's a lot of times people want to push where the only real key metric they're looking at is schedule. And what you do is you just have a risk buildup, and the risks continue to build up. And what I do, this is where I do tell the workforce that you may need to push the big red button, is if you pause on it, made sure that you understood what the technical rigor that needed to go into being successful, and slowed it down, you avoid the problems and challenges in the future. So we try to tell our workforce, don't be afraid to bring that up where it looks like you're missing a milestone. Ultimately, and I'll go back to the warehouses littered with GAO reports, ultimately technical risk is going to translate itself, if not managed. That technical risk will translate itself in all cases to cost and schedule, and you can just see that coming. So real quick, one more thing is just, so from our, I didn't get the hook yet, right? So from the leadership within the Department of Defense acquisition community, and I know that Mr. Kendall was here a couple of days ago. If you heard him speak, I believe he would have talked, I read the notes afterwards, I believe he would have talked about better buying power. 28 years as an acquisition professional, a lot of common sense that was put in there, but really him focusing on 3 key areas, thinking, the people, and then trying to get processes and bureaucracies minimized to where we can push things through faster. Through my 28 years, I have seen DoD 5000 go through a lot of modulations, mostly intended to either improve an oversight or to streamline. And I'll leave the proof to the reader on whether or not that streamlining part ever really came out of any of the rewrites of it. This is a golden opportunity with Better Buying Power 1.0 and 2.0 to really focus on the things that matter and target cost growth, target making good decisions about how you incentivize a contractor. We need contractors, we need industry. Without them, there is no building of this equipment. But to incentivize them in the right way, to feed in competition, and to really solve the technical first. So once again, I want to thank you, and I want to thank you all for what you're doing.
Jim, thank you. Okay, Ken, at the end of the day, we give all this stuff to you.
All right.
Requirements, specifications, and you deliver the product. So your perspective?
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to participate on the panel today. And you will hear some redundancy from me. I'll try to be brief so that we have time for some questions and answers. But I think the opportunity I have from an industry perspective as a provider of major defense products to the warfighter is to provide some real-life examples. And I'm going to do that shortly of 2 programs that we believe have been very successful as a result of acquisition excellence and has sped products to the warfighter. And then I was going to juxtapose that with 1 program that we currently have that has some challenges, and maybe describe the reasons for those challenges and how we're going to recover from that. So we are, like all of industry, Newport News Shipbuilding is about, of course, safety of our workforce, but we're also committed to delivering quality products to the warfighter on time, or preferably early, and under cost from the affordability perspective. And those are key tenets of what we do every day. We're going to negotiate and have awarded at Newport News Shipbuilding alone this year $17.3 billion in new contracts. So what we provide to the warfighter is substantial in cost, and they are long duration products, if you will, long cycle, long duration, aircraft carrier construction, submarine construction, and aircraft carrier refueling. But although those are long duration programs, schedule and delivery to the operator early is very critical, as the affordability piece is as well. It's very important industry, not just Newport News, each of those tenets that I just described on quality, timeliness, and affordability. Each of our three major programs are similar in regards and have some differences. And I was just going to hit each of those briefly today to maybe provide some thought for where acquisition excellence and speed of the warfighter, again, has worked well. And I'll juxtapose that with one other. So some real-life examples from industry, from a Newport News shipbuilding perspective. The Virginia-class submarine program, a very successful Department of Defense program for both industry and for government and for the warfighters at the end. It's a very successful acquisition program and a very successful program in service. When you ask yourself why, it's some of the things that you've heard the other panelists talk to today. Not only is it a relatively mature program, but it absolutely benefits from a competition and or a teaming between Newport News and General Dynamics Electric Boat, stability in the plan, rate of build. The Virginia-class submarine program is going to ramp from 1 per year to 2 per year. That benefits industry and the full industrial base of suppliers. Block buys, all of those things result in serial construction, which allows for economic order quantity of material, allows for grouping of manufacturing, and allows for efficient material procurement with a sustained industrial base. As well, with that sort of a program, substantial learning curve results. The industry is able to make capital investments that substantially reduce time and cost. And the spiral incorporation, as you've heard, of technology insertion. Virginia-class, the first two boats of Virginia-class, Virginia and Texas, took about 94 months to deliver to the Navy. Those boats today, we're on the 10th boat today. Minnesota delivers in about the next 2 to 3 weeks. Those boats are going to deliver at about 60 months. So 94 months will have been reduced to 60 months. There's a goal between Newport News and General Dynamics Electric Boat to continue to reduce that time to 58 months, 55 months, probably reach about the extent of what's practical and possible. But speed to the warfighter absolutely demonstrated there through the things that you've heard before me on requirements, on acquisition excellence, and the benefits that those programs experience as a result. One other program that I would put in the category of acquisition excellence and success, and I'll only speak to it briefly, is carrier refuelings and overhauls. Those are about 44-month duration programs. Those programs experience from many of the same things I just described: heel to toe, ship after ship refuelings with little gap in between, sustained, stable, strong industrial base, consistent requirements, managed change, and a spiral approach or an incremental approach to technology. Now, the one program that I would juxtapose those two with is a Newport News program, and that's the first ship of the class, the Gerald R. Ford, follow-on to Nimitz-class platforms. And as you would expect, that's a challenging program. Again, first of a class brings with it new lessons learned, opportunities in the design and build effort. That ship was built concurrent with design completing, so that ship started construction before design was complete. Necessary in that case, but not ideal. The technology insertion on Ford is substantial, from radars to reactor plants to EMALs for catapult launch, advanced arresting gear, and significant technology insertion all combined in that first platform. As a result, the schedule has been extended about 4 months, and there's certainly some cost pressure that industry and the Navy didn't want to experience. Now, where that's going to change is the second ship of the class, CVN 79, the John F. Kennedy, and follow-on ships. Those ships, like Virginia-class and RCOH, will begin to benefit from lessons learned, repeat build, complete design, economic order quantity material, technology will be understood subsequent to completing forward, and all the things that you've heard before me. Also requirements management, reduced change, so that CVN 79 and 80 that follow forward will be largely very similar in all respects. And then I would just close my comments, at least, to follow up with Jim's comments on Better Buying Power initiative, and just give you 3 examples, at least for shipbuilding, and I think others in industry as well, where we have absolutely experienced that benefit. Controlling costs through the product life cycle. The Gerald R. Ford, despite some of the acquisition challenges of a first-of-a-class ship, Ford-class ships will experience about a $4 to $5 billion reduction in total ownership cost over each ship's 50-year life, largely as a result of crew reductions from the technology that's been installed and the electrification of the ship as compared to Nimitz. Second area would be strong partnerships with the requirements community, in our case NAVCO5 and technical warrant holders, and that's both establishment of the requirements and the minimization of change in those requirements. And thirdly is incentivizing productivity and innovation in industry, and that has come in the form of incentives for industry to make capital investments, and we've made significant capital investments. Virginia-class program, for example, Newport News has invested over $200 million in infrastructure to reduce cost and time to deliver. So when those contracts contain the right incentive structure, there absolutely is an opportunity for industry to make good decisions that benefit delivery to the operator and to the warfighter. Thank you.
Okay, Ken, thank you. So I have a series of questions that we've talked about to sort of stimulate the group. However, if there are some burning platform sort of questions that anybody has in the audience, okay, and I guess there's microphones on both sides, we'd ask you to kind of go to them. So I don't know if anybody wants to step forward first. If not, we have a volunteer. So yes, sir. And if you could kind of state just a little bit about where you're coming from.
Okay.
So we'd have a perspective of maybe, the question context.
Yes, sir. Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Travis Doster, former Marine Corps. And over the 8 years of my military experience, I've tested everything from steel-toed boots all the way up to the beta testing of the Global Command and Control System at former GIFCOM. And my question is, in the face of budgetary constraints and the pace of fielding experimentation slowing down, troops are going to have less opportunities to see and use new technology. How do we balance the acquisition of truly innovative, game-changing products against the shock and awe scenario of novelty items that would have been more easily vetted in the past?
Okay, so how do we basically take advantage of getting stuff to the warfighter in an area where we're going to have a decreasing budget and do it more rapidly, is I think the question you were asking?
Yes, sir. And my concern is that the less that troops see, when they do get their hands on it, they're going to think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, when in fact it may not be.
Okay, all right. So let me have Terry and Al, you kind of, or Al, you want to start?
Sure, why not? Again, I think that's a great question, because that is what begat the network integration evaluation, that in-phase part of the Agile process. I'll use my favorite training aid. Soldiers were carrying these around, or they were carrying around smartphones. Why can't we do something like that? We had this lugubrious system of command and control, and that's really what started us on the road to our current process. We have a series of things ongoing. I think it's CSDA, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's essentially bringing digital devices into general use by soldiers. Now, they may not be able to use it in a tactical setting, but they can use it in garrison. And right now, they're getting downloaded training training programs. They're using it to do some of the rudimentary things that all of us had to do in garrison. So again, we're looking at that, and to your point about shock and awe, we're trying to take the cyclic approach to keep up with that rate of change in the automation in the IT world. I hope that provides some source of answer to your question. Over.
So Terry, if you want to take a little bit, I mean, you're more focused on the future, really focused on the future in terms of concepts. How would you address that question in terms of getting, if you will, experienced Navy, Marines, whatever, to kind of see what some of those future concepts might look like?
Thanks. To talk about the future, I'll talk about the past for just a second. When Carl Connie and I were in Desert Storm 1, all these things kept showing up on our ship on USS Midway to help us do our job. Some of it was good, a lot of it was not. None of it was really tested or experimented with. And I think that's going to be the key difference is we have to put things in the hands of operators and experiment with them and war game with them as we've never done before. I was at an Army Futures thing with General Odierno, and they were talking about, hey, we've got all this great lightweight gear for soldiers. And he said, it doesn't do us any good if we've got 120 pounds of lightweight gear. We have to decide what works, and that means you have to put it in the hands of the operators. That's what we're doing with the Trident Warrior initiatives. To me, nothing is good until you put it out on a ship and show me that it works on a ship. UAVs are cool, but until you can take off and land consistently from a ship, it doesn't mean anything to me. So it's about getting stuff to the hands of operators out there. And the other thing we find out is they a lot of times figure out new and better ways to use it than we ever envisioned ourselves. So it's a great question. Thanks.
Okay, Jim, did you want to make a comment?
So, Travis, I don't know if you're going to be overly satisfied with my answer, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to tell you why. So, General Al Gray, 29th Commandant of the Marine Corps, talked about what happened when we were in our peace dividend phase. We never stopped doing that. This is where you get into, you may not be putting big dollars into buying a lot of things, and that looks a lot like the future, in this regard of not buying a whole lot. But experimentation did continue. Thinking continued. As we come through the era of austerity, I think we have to recognize that there is on the back side of it. We don't know how long the era of austerity is, but there's an era of prosperity that's coming. General Gray would always beat into us, so to speak, that this is the time we have to be thinking. This is the time we have to be experimenting with those concepts. And quite frankly, it doesn't cost a lot to do that. If we have the workforce and we have a mixture of science and technology and an acquisition workforce, we need to get those out there. Not so that they lead to an acquisition program right away, because that's not on the horizon in the near term, but just so that we can start doing things, even as the Admiral said about 120 pounds on the back. There are ways of lightening the load on Marines and soldiers that, quite frankly, take experimentation to find out how to do different things with common gear we have. So your question was, how do you balance it? Bottom line is, I don't know if it should be balanced. I think it needs to be weighted in the era of austerity, weighted toward being able to do that level of experimentation to prepare us for the backside as we come out of it.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thanks, gentlemen. Ben Coleman from the Crick. Last week I had a chance to go to Pax River and see some pretty significant rapid development capability in government-owned institutions. My question is, what role do those have to play, especially when it comes to government-owned IP and patents? One of the examples they gave was a helicopter program that bid out to the civilian sector, would have cost $350 million and taken 5 years to develop. They in-house were able to create a solution that was cost $1 million and got the solution to the warfighter in 35 weeks. Are we able to leverage the indigenous organic engineering capability to a greater extent to get warfighter solutions quicker while also maintaining the IP? Another example they gave was it costs upwards of $1 million per line of code to pay to a current defense contractor and a current aviation system we have, whereas they, with their indigenous coders, could do that on the fly and save the government that money. So what role does the government have in that indigenously owned IP?
So just to make sure we got the question right, what you're asking is, from a, if you will, organizational standpoint within the Department of Defense, how can we better leverage our organic engineering capabilities such that we don't have to pay, if you will, for a lot of IP that gets developed, or consequently not be able to field capability sooner? Is that about right? So Jim, I guess since you are the chief engineer for the Marine Corps, why don't you talk a little bit about what you see in terms of your capabilities from an engineering standpoint? And then what I'd like to do is, Ken, you can speak a little bit, if you will, from an industry perspective, kind of what your engineers are doing to kind of think about this as well.
Okay, Lieutenant, great question. So some people told you some stuff, did you say last week, last month, whatever it was. I'm going to question some of the things that they told you, just so you know. First off, this use of indigenous workforce in the government, I believe it's absolutely key. As a matter of fact, there are 4 major procurement systems commands within the Department of the Navy: the Naval Air Systems Command, Naval Sea Systems Command, Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command, and the Marine Corps Systems Command. The warfare centers that we have, the government warfare centers, work for the commanders of the first 3 that I mentioned. The Marine Corps doesn't have a standalone warfare center. However, all the warfare centers are naval. We happen to be the only one of those 4 naval systems commands who has a order given by our commanding general that says you will use a government workforce where you can and where it makes sense. But the purpose of it is not to be in competition with industry. The purpose of it is, if the government doesn't get smart, you can't be smart buyers. Plain and simple. I don't think there's any way really around it where if you don't have people with the technical expertise on the inside, again, not to be in competition with industry, but to understand what they're getting from industry and the right way to specify something, and to understand what change looks like, and to understand technically what's a testable requirement and an achievable requirement, then we kind of set ourselves up to fail. And there's lots of examples of where we've had a pendulum swing where we start to get rid of, downsize our technical workforce, and it leads to troubles on overrunning programs. The IP, I will tell you, require it. On the acquisition side, and it is something that came out in better buying power. It is something that has been around for a while, but at times it seems as if we're afraid to do it. We have to require the IP from industry, because ultimately it's not about trying to take away their ideas, but it is about having a viable competition base in the future. So where somebody says, hey, you can't, if you gave it to industry, you wouldn't have the IP. Untrue. Industry gets to bid it. If they bid it and it becomes too expensive and you can't award to them, or you can get a better deal, then go get the better deal. But it's not a black and white situation in that regard. Same thing about this 5-year to 1 year. If it can be done in 1 year, it shouldn't take 5 years if you went out to industry. It shouldn't. So there's something that's driving that, and it might be the the stigmatism of, hey, the acquisition program takes you that long, right? Has everybody heard about the Naval program, the Naval acquisition program? What it was somebody went through 5,000 one time, DoD 5,000 one time, and they said if you bought nothing, it would take you 5 years just to go through every one of the wickets. That's if you did everything that was required by it, as opposed to trying to do it smartly. So that might be, as a matter of fact, that might jive perfectly with the 5 years that they told you. But if you require the IP and you have a smart government workforce, then I think you can achieve the goals that we really have set out for ourselves to get the best product for the government and for the warfighter. Over.
So Jim, before I pass it over to Ken, though, I just like just a little bit of calibration here. As you have grown up as an engineer and you have seen changes in the organic engineering capability, on a scale of 1 to 10, I think my perception was years ago we were probably a 10. Now we're getting close to the 1 just because a lot of folks are retiring. But the intern programs and other things are going to bring in some engineers. Just for a very short response here, how would you calibrate your engineering capability vis-a-vis when you first entered into the service?
I would say when I came in 1985, it was the height of the Reagan buildup. So we were kind of on the upswing that was going to build an engineering workforce that would be prepared for the future, which is when, at the time I was working submarines, we were building 6 submarines a year. So there was a major buildup. I almost believe we're about where we were maybe when I joined. We did go up to a 10, to where even on shipbuilding programs they were government-led designs. That became totally not in vogue. If you go to somewhere around the mid-90s, I think it was all probably under the umbrella of acquisition reform. Right, we're going to buy everything with a 1-page statement of work and no spec, and that's where we started to really go back down. I think we've learned that lesson, and we're on the swing back up. I'm comfortable with the growth that we've made in the technical workforce of the government, and quite frankly, where we're at right now.
Okay, thank you. Ken?
I'll just follow up. I agree with Jim. It's, at least from an industry perspective, it doesn't feel like a competition with our engineering teams. And the government has cycled in terms of resources in the engineering, organic capabilities. But we, work as a teammate with our Naval Shipyard Engineering, with our NAVCO 5 and other technical warrant holders. and share ideas. I don't think industry in general is overly protective of IP. That's something that gets shared pretty readily through the types of contracts that we have. Newport News has 4,000 to 5,000 engineers and designers. We are constantly floating ideas, thoughts, requirements to our government teammates. They're working with us as well with ideas and thoughts in a pretty open, dynamic environment, all to get at affordability and or schedule improvement in the products. So I think there's a right best value in many cases when you step back and you look at a particular engineering requirement or a need. There's got to be a balance. Who has the capability? Who has the capacity? Who has maybe the experience? And it could be either industry or government. Where does the best value get produced for the government at the right cost and the right time? And when industry can't meet the government's capabilities or cost or schedule, that's something industry needs to go off and understand why and address and make those improvements that are necessary.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so I have a question. We've talked about this a little bit, and I want to get this out on the floor here. The whole notion of one of the things to speed up acquisition is tradable requirements. The ability to sort of make trades, not only in the concept development, when we get into more specific, if you will, warfighting demands, and then ultimately acquisition pushback. My sense of it is that in many cases the issue with the trade-off is we do not know what the requirements cost. And so what I'd like to sort of throw onto the table here between the requirements folks as well as then acquisition folks, what are we doing to, if you will, better inform the warfighters, the senior leaders, and the acquisition professionals about cost requirements and what is the total cost of ownership? So anybody willing to bite on that first?
I'll give it a shot.
I know.
General Sorensen. One of the things we've done is, and it sounds like I'm parroting Secretary Kendall's Better Buying Power memo, is we've gone into the department and said we need some affordability targets or goals. With that as the onset, as we are developing those requirements, and to Jim's point earlier, when I say requirements, I'm talking about the big R, the operational requirements. And from that, what is driving the cost? And as we look at that, how do we bring the cost of the program down to something that we can afford based upon that target I talked about? We've had two recent experiences with that, painful but productive, where we were provided a target and we have the individual characteristics, those operational requirements I spoke to. We also have the distribution within a unit. Does every soldier, does every squad, platoon, company, whatever it might be, need one of those? Or does every formation? So we have three ways that we're working it hard now. One are those requirements, the operational requirements. Two is the distribution within a unit. And then three, what units get it? And this one has really caused us to step back and really think about it because of the affordability. So as I said, we have two recent experiences that have brought us back into what that target is, and again, we've met the target, and it will provide our soldiers that which is operationally relevant.
Terry? Or Jim, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, so I think that's a great question. We talked a little bit about this partnering between the acquisition community and the requirements community, the big R requirements community. It's part of the solution, but it's not a direct answer to the question. It's part of the solution because there has to be trade space provided by the acquisition community, so there's an understanding on the requirements community about what the real implications are of those requirements or where the risks are. But I think the original question was really geared at, so how are you going to know? How are you going to know exactly what they cost? Or a lot of times we don't know what they cost, and it was like, hey, that's a pretty good idea, and we kind of set off on it, and then you end up discovering as you go through. I'll tell you that there's been a big buildup in the Navy acquisition community in schedulers and cost estimators for just that reason. And it's also sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. You have to understand it right up front. We're getting to the point of kind of slowing a program down at the beginning to really try and understand that cost up front. And then there's different ways to estimate out the cost. But you can only really estimate on what it is you know. The rest of it goes into the risk bucket. All right, and then you get into, you got to manage the risk. You can't hope the risk away. You can't assume it away. You can't PCS away the risk, right? I mean, you got to manage that risk actively and understand where it might lead to growth and how you have to enter more trade space back into the equation. We're doing more and more of that. It used to be in the old days. I'll tell you what, I'd say for over 20 years of my career, the requirement's the requirement. That's what we used to hear. The requirement's the requirement. You got it, go execute it. And really, it doesn't lend itself to that. And again, you can. If 50% of all programs are funded to the 50% probability of success rate, then why do 100% of them overrun? I mean, that was always another one of the lines that would come up. And I think it's really that there isn't that understanding of the cost, and there's got to be the focused effort of it. And I think we're stepping off on trying to do that now. Over.
Okay, and if I could just briefly also address one other question here. So I think Admiral Kraft had a very good quote there, learn faster than the competition. I think if you look at the competition today in terms of the adversary, they are very agile in their development. They use mature technologies and they field it very quickly. And in many cases, it's all the use of COTS. So I guess I would just sort of say to the folks here, specifically Admiral Kraft or whatever, what do you kind of see as the future for, if you will, being more agile and bringing in more COTS solutions in order to facilitate delivery of capability quicker to the warfighter?
Well, it's a great question. We look at innovation and things that are changing rapidly. So much of that's happening in telecommunications. And it's not happening inside the military as fast or as much as it's happening in industry. So I think our challenge is going to be, how do we be prompt followers of the things that are happening out there and then adapt them to our own uses? We're going to have to be more agile than we've ever been before in looking at those kind of things. When you look at communications devices, the fact there's going to be 2 communications devices per person on the planet in the next 10 or 15 years. That's a whole entire shell of communication and ISR, or whatever you want to call it, that we're going to have to figure out, how that works for us. And nobody's going to build something unique for us when we're just a very small piece of what's going on. I can point to the P-8 as an example of how we've taken a commercial aircraft and, we talk about payloads, not platforms. We've taken a commercial aircraft and adapted that to what we're doing in the Navy. I think that's going to have to continue because, frankly, we can't keep up with the rate of innovation right now.
So I'll just go to the far end here from a use of COTS. I mean, typically in the way we are now, you don't basically bring a carrier, you don't find that at a Walmart. So your perspective of COTS, Ken?
On COTS, we have definitely experienced the benefit of COTS in many cases. We've incorporated more and more commercial off-the-shelf technology on Ford. In some cases, it's hard to do given the requirements and also the desire to have parts commonality to other platforms and to reduce cost and schedule and sustain an industrial base that's produced certain components. So it has to be thoughtfully applied in terms of what that material will be expected to do and the industrial base that needs to support it, not only from a hardware perspective, but from a logistics perspective as well. So we encourage the use of COTS. Our design team with the Navy engineering folks and the requirements setters have worked hard to look for those opportunities. It's something that I think industry supports and wants to further, but very thoughtful set of requirements need to be considered before, particularly on existing programs, those changes get made.
Okay, and for those of you that have gray hair, you probably have watched the McLaughlin report. For those of you that don't, you might even know who McLaughlin is. But at the end of his particular deliberations there, he would always have left some 30-second lightning round. So I'm going to ask each one of the contestants here, each one of the panelists, you're king for the day. You're still going to be in your job for another year, another 2. What is the one thing that you want to see changed? Just one thing that you want to see changed before you leave your particular office?
What I'll hit on is dumb games that requirements guys play. And that is when you're setting out to buy a certain number of aircraft, certain number of ships, We're constantly changing how many we're going to buy and what year we're going to do it, pushing it around the 5-year defense plan to fit up or pushing it out. What that does, it raises the cost of every unit that you are going to buy. And then if later you change your mind and say, okay, I want to buy back those units, you're going to buy them back at a much higher cost than you would have had initially. So you end up paying for 2 Air Wings worth of aircraft when your initial plan was 1. We need to kind of decide what we're going to buy and stick with it and just stop changing so fast.
Okay. Al?
Thank you. I would say really embrace, in the requirements community, embrace an incremental approach, buying fewer more often. Though we talk about it and we are really trying to do it, I'm not sure we're there. And I think we just have to accept that in these fiscally constrained times. That's the only way to do it. It violates the dictum of everybody has the same, but as I've told people, there was this guy back in the revolutionary times, von Steuben, who commented to General Washington, you know, the state of musketry in the Continental Army is terrible. There are 7 different variants of musketry. That's 200 odd years ago. Nothing's changed. So thank you.
That's encouraging. Okay, Jim.
All right, so I would say that this theme that I've been throwing out about this partnering, acquisition, and requirements to understand the trade space and understand the risks up front and then be able to manage them, I'd like to see that be a standard operating procedure that we use as opposed to by exception and personality dependent.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. And Ken?
And very briefly, from an industry perspective, we've talked about the benefit we're seeing with technical requirements management, with scope control, with acquisition excellence in a number of regards talked here today. I'll tell you from our perspective, industry is, however, seeing significant increase in oversight and regulation in the areas of business systems, earned value management, expectations and requirements, MMAS, audits, and those things. I don't tend to believe, by any regard, that those aren't required. But where we're seeing other things managed in terms of control, limit the change, we're seeing escalation from an industry perspective in terms of business systems oversight and the associated penalties with those business systems if they don't meet a very, very high standard.
And I'll just sum it up after my 20 years of acquisition and so forth, and maybe the panel. Think big, start small, scale fast, experiment often. Thank you very much.
Outstanding job.